Hey guys, just wanted to make a little video for what we covered in class today. Hope things are going well. We are starting a new section on ecology ecosystems today. So we're still got a little bit more to cover with ecology, and I think today's lesson that we talked about was pretty interesting. I think you'll think it's interesting. So we'll go ahead and get started. So this won't be too long of a video. The first thing we talked about is this concept of primary succession. It occurs in essentially lifeless areas where there's no soil, and typically it's going to occur after there's been some type of maybe a lava flow, a new island forming from a volcanic eruption, or a newly formed sand dune, or glaciers. And glaciers, when they retreat, they will carve out all the soil and just leave behind bare rock. And so that is another time that we might see this. So the key to this primary succession is that you start off with bare rock. And what happens is there's this series of progressions of different organisms that will occur and live and be found in that area from that time that it's bare rock until later on. And so we can look at this little drawing, this little picture here of it. And let me back up a little bit so you can see it all. So you start off, so this is a picture showing that this is not just like the base of a mountain and you're going away from it. That kind of maybe what it looks like. This is the same area over an extended period of time. And what happens here is, let me move this up here. You start off with bare rock, and the first species that show up are what we call the pioneer species. That was on your bell ringer today. And these are going to be lichen, which we talked about when we talked about mutualism. It's a symbiotic relationship between fungus and algae. And they can live on just bare rock, but they are an organism, and they can be found there. Sometimes you'll see moss and things like that growing on the bare rock. And then what happens is years after years of growth and dying, you have these, you start to get a very, very, very thin layer of soil produced. And then when you start getting a little bit of soil, you can have these little small annuals, smaller plants, kind of weeds and things that grow in there. And then as it grows and dies and grows and dies, you get more topsoil built up, and you can get grasses and perennials growing, some small shrubs and trees. Eventually you get to what we call a climax community, when you have this very stable, a lot of diversity found in this area between plants, animals, all that, and this is called a climax community. It takes hundreds of years for this to occur, for primary succession to occur. Now, we talked in class today about this picture here is an image that would have been taken from Hawaii, and this is a lava tube. And so these lava tubes are good examples of primary succession. When you go into this Volcano National Park in Hawaii, when you walk through the gates, when you drive through the gates, as far as you can see, you see these bare lava fields of just bare rock, black. It looks like you're on a different planet. But when you drive a few miles down the road, you're in this dense rainforest where succession has occurred. And here's an example: lava at some point flowed through this area, and but now, one thing about with Hawaii, primary succession is going to occur much faster than here, because the growing conditions there are perfect. 80 degrees, highs every day, lows in the 70s. They have rains very frequently. So the growing conditions are ideal, and so primary succession is going to occur much faster in an area like this. Now, we mentioned this concept of a pioneer species. Remember, a pioneer species are the first to colonize a previously disrupted or damaged ecosystem. An example: lichens and mosses. Now, they can grow on that rock without soil. They really don't have to have roots. Lichen and they are just that symbiotic relationship between fungus and algae that I mentioned earlier. Mosses are what we call non-vascular plants. They don't have vascular tissue like the tubes that carry water, like xylem and phloem, that carry sugar and food down to the roots. Moss don't have those, so they don't have to have roots that dig down into the soil. Now, moss typically do have to have a moist environment, so because they absorb a lot of their water just through their tissue and straight into their tissue. So, but anyway, those are considered pioneer species because they're the first to colonize the area. And then there's a picture of lichen. You've probably seen that before, growing on rocks or on trees and moss. Of course, we know what that looks like. And then that concept of climax community is this final stage of succession where that area remains relatively unchanged for long periods. You have a lot of diversity until you can have problems like forest fires can damage that, or humans can come in and damage it, which we'll talk about a little more later. The next type of succession I want to talk about is something called secondary succession. So secondary succession is a series of community changes, just like in primary succession. The only difference, this takes place in an area that was previously colonized. So, but that area has been disturbed by some type of disaster, whether man-made or non-man-made. Maybe a forest fire, or it could be a hurricane or a tornado or a flood, or man could come in and just clear cut a forest. And so that's an example of secondary succession. Now the key to secondary succession is this idea that it's taken place in a previously colonized area. So that previously colonized area has one key feature that the primary succession did not have. What do you think that might be? I'm sure you guessed it right. It is soil. Notice in this picture here, you don't have the bare rock. So in secondary succession, this one is occurring after a forest fire, and you'll notice that the forest fire wipes out the forest, but it doesn't wipe out the soil. So you still have soil. So you don't have that years of building up soil with secondary succession. So it's going to occur much faster here. You'll notice 1 to 2 years you get some little small annual plants and weeds, grasses and perennials maybe after 3 or 4 years, small shrubs and small trees from the 5 to 150 years, and then 150 plus years you're back to that climax community. So again, the key to secondary succession that makes it different than primary is that secondary succession, there's already soil present. So the last thing that we talked about in class today was I showed this image, and this is an image of strip mining. So this is something that took place in Sallisaw years ago. Back in the 30s and 40s, they used to do a lot of strip mining. And what they would do is they would go in and they dig out this big trench like you see in this image, and they'd pile up all the spoils and take the coal out. And then they'd move over and they'd dig this another really deep, long trench, and they'd fill in that previous hole. Then they'd move over and they'd dig another trench and fill in that hole. So they would continue to do that as long as there was coal present and things like that, and they could harvest the coal out of it. So that kind of left a scenario for succession to take place. I'm going to try to pull up some images here of the town of Sallisaw through Google Earth, and what you'll notice here, this is over kind of behind Tractor Supply. You'll see, some of you may not have known this was here, some of you may not have. Right close to the interstate, there's a strip pit right there, a couple of them, where they did that strip mining. Now, if you go across the interstate, I think there was some probably on the south side of the interstate through here, but now I think they've developed some houses through there. But if you keep going in this direction, you'll notice there's another strip pit, and you can kind of follow the path that they took with their strip mining. I'm going to kind of zoom out a little bit here, and you'll see there's a strip pit there, and they really started making a lot of them here. There's one, and then so you're pretty close to the airport here and you can see that strip pit, cross Highway 59. And there's some more strip pits where they did the strip mining. Now you'll notice here, you can really see this is a good example of that of where we've reached this climax community. Behind here, this is where the spoils were, where they piled all their dirt and their clay and their shell and all that up. And now it's taken a long time, but now this is an established climax community where there's a forested area. There's probably a lot of diverse wildlife and plant life that live there. Now, when you go out here further, I want to show you something that they did a few years ago in some places where they've done the strip mining. So you can see it right here in this area. Now this was a strip pit. Now this strip pit used to go across here and kind of curve and right up by the road, and this one came out to the road here. And what they did was they came in and what they called reclaimed that strip mine. and they smoothed out all of those spoils and cut down all the trees, turned that into pasture land. Well, kind of hard on the, I don't know if it was the EPA or who decides to come in and do this, but I know the companies that did the strip mining came in and reclaimed these. To me, I feel like you're setting back that ecosystem by reclaiming it, because that had gone through succession and reached this climax community, and then they've gone in and wiped it all out, and really the soil left behind is really poor, because if you think about it, when they dug out those trenches, they piled all that topsoil on the bottom, and so then all that's left on the top is a lot of shale and clay and rock and things like that really isn't good for growing things. So that was a problem, and in some of these areas that they reclaim, it's going to take a few years before that topsoil really starts to build back up, and you can start having good grassland or a forested area if you wanted to at some point. But so is that primary succession? Is it secondary succession? To me, it's kind of in between. There's not bare rock like you see in primary succession, but there's not good topsoil that you would see in secondary succession. It's this shale clay mixture that it's better. It's going to grow more stuff than rock will, but it's going to take a little bit longer than secondary succession because the soil is just so poor. In fact, this area, I'm going to show you one more area where they reclaimed it a few years back. If I can get it to slide down here, this used to be a strip pit that ran right through here, and you can see this area here. You kind of see this this pattern in here, and this was a strip pit that they filled in and they leveled it all out. And the soil in this little area here is not the best, and it's taken about 20 years, and it's finally starting to get some decent grass growing, but it's been a slow process. So anyway, that's an example of succession that has occurred here in our own town. So it's where we get the name Black Diamond, where they would strip that coal out of the ground, and so that was kind of cool. But anyway, so we'll talk more about some more ecology tomorrow. I'll probably make another video and share it with you. See you guys later.